Okay, I think we're about ready to begin. Good evening and a warm welcome to yet another biography event. My name is Kai Bird and I'm the director of the Leon Levy Center for Biography, a wholly unique institution hosted by the Graduate Center of the City University of New York and founded by Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation in the year 2007. I want to thank Shelby for her steadfast support to the Biography Center. It is her vision that makes this program possible. Please note that our next event will be on Tuesday, April 19th at 6 p.m. to discuss Kate Clifford Larson's new biography of the civil rights icon, Fannie Lou Hamer. She will be in conversation with the Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer of Malcolm X, Tamara Payne. Please mark your calendars and register for this free event on the Leon Levy website. And if you have not done so already, please register your email on our website so you can be notified of our future events. But tonight we are here to celebrate the publication of Take Up Space, the Unprecedented AOC. This unusual biography project was put together by the editors of New York Magazine. Two contributors to this collection of essays, Lisa Miller and Rebecca Traister, will be in conversation with Michael Kazin, an acclaimed historian and former editor of Dissent magazine. Lisa Miller is the author of Heaven, Our Enduring Fascination with the Afterlife, published in 2010. She is currently a contributing editor for New York and formerly a senior editor of Newsweek and a religion columnist for the Washington Post. Rebecca Traister is the author of Big Girls Don't Cry, The Election That Changed Everything for American Women, published in 2010, All the Single Ladies, published in 2016, and Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger, published in 2018. Finally, Michael Kazin is the author of 7 books, most recently, What It Took to Win, A History of the Democratic Party, published earlier this year. Kazin is professor of history at Georgetown University, and perhaps it is relevant to this conversation that as a young man, he was a leader of the SDS at Harvard. Please look for all these books online at bookshops.org, a site that will lead you to your local independent bookstore. Michael will steer the conversation for about 50 minutes, and then we'll take questions from our virtual audience. Please click on the Q&A box below to type in your questions, and Michael will be sure to get to as many as he can. We will try to end this program after about 1 hour. Again, thanks to the Leon Levy Foundation for funding this and all our other events. Michael, I now turn the rest of this evening's event over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai, and thank you for everybody. Thank you to everyone at the Levy Center for helping us set this up, and thanks everybody for showing up. Hello, Lisa. Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for producing this fascinating book. And first question to ask is, this is an unusual kind of biography. Is a excellent narrative of AOC's life by Lisa. But there's a great introduction by Rebecca, and the second half of the book involves what you might call takeouts, small, short essays, some of them in prose, some of them in photos and prose, some of them, there's one graphic essay, if you call it that. So if one or both of you could talk about how you conceive this biography, and also explain the title, Take Up Space. What does that mean?
Well, take up space is something that AOC herself says. And she said it early on in her campaign. There's a scene that is in the documentary, Take Down the House, where she is nervous before her televised debate with Joe Crowley, who is her establishment opponent, Democratic opponent. And she's sitting in her living room in the Bronx, and she's making these like big hand gestures. She's like, it's like she's about to fly. She's about to take off. And her boyfriend Riley says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "This is me. I'm taking up space." he's going to tell me I'm small. He's going to tell me I'm inadequate. He's going to tell me I'm incompetent. He's going to call me a girl. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the kind of thing she's saying. And I'm taking up space. And she's actually like literally taking up space with her arms in the room. And it is a thing that she says about herself when she is feeling intimidated or insecure or overwhelmed. She's like, look, I'm going to take up space. I'm going to be big in the room. I'm going to be a force. I'm going to be forceful. And we thought, the editors thought, this was a very good way to describe her impact on Congress, on our political scene, on our national story about what a politician is or isn't, or should or shouldn't be. And so that's why we named it that. As for the format of the book, I mean, I think that, New York Magazine is famous for its packaging, for the way that it tells stories in all of these different dimensions. We tell stories through graphics, we tell stories through photography, we tell stories through beautiful narrative, we still tell stories through strong opinion, we tell stories, in all of these different, with annotations and lots of little gizmos and gadgets. And we wanted to emulate that flavor of New York Magazine in this book. And somebody before we went live was talking about how it felt like a hyperlinked book. And that was intentional. That was very intentional. It was a way of like creating a book that wasn't front to back, but where you could read in and around it, where you could refer backwards and forwards, where it could be a really dynamic experience that wasn't just, linear and two-dimensional.
Is this also a way of capturing, the fact that AOC is so good at social media, that she obviously is 32 years old. She grew up with this medium in a way it would be perhaps wrong to have a 800-page biography for her, even a 400-page biography for her, which didn't have this kind of format.
Well, I want to speak to that because I assume that it's very likely that there will be an 800-page biography of AOC at some point. And one of the things that appealed to me, from the little bios that they read at the beginning, both Lisa and I have written books. You've obviously written 7 books. Lisa and I have also been magazine journalists, and we know there are these different tones. You write a column, you write a long feature. There are all these different approaches to how to cover subjects. And one of the things that appealed to me, and again, I'm a minor contributor to this book, but I did love the idea of having this kind of group of mingled voices and this sort of in-between space of, it's not a magazine and it's not an 800-page biography. It's something in between and something different that captures a lot of perspectives on the subject. And I write in my introduction about the velocity of her career so far, right? That she seems to have moved with a lot of speed. And I really like the idea that this could be a snapshot, right? It's not the comprehensive, 800-page, volumes that are going to be written maybe about her, but it's also not a magazine article. And it is something that captures a moment in time that I think is very valuable, to remember what people were saying, thinking, feeling, what her story read like in this period early in her career.
And just to be completely clear, like, we explicitly discussed this at the beginning. We were like, here is this person who is not what she says, women like me don't run for Congress. Like she said, that was the copy on her ad. And we wanted to respect the unusual nature of her candidacy, the unusual nature of her, political career, the unusual nature of like who she is. And we explicitly talked about how we didn't want to write, an 800-page tome. We didn't want to have it in that sort of ponderous voice. We wanted it to be fresh and fun and real and intimate. And
I have to say, it's the first biography I've read which has a whole section of Snapchat quotes and photos from teenagers. So perhaps that's going to be a new form.
But that is, and this speaks to what you said. She communicates in a way that is, and so successfully, she communicates in a way that is different from politicians who've come before her. with Snapchat, with Instagram Live, with the videos, with the I'm cooking and talking about organizing while my dog is eating noodles next to me or whatever. You know, she, as you know, in these various moments in which the way that politicians successfully communicate to voters, she's made a huge stride in terms of being able to use the internet fluently, so much so that she was teaching her older colleagues about how to do it practically as soon as she got to the House. They were like, how do you do it? How do you reach people this way? And so, yes, the Snapchat stuff is reflective of who she is and what her skills as a communicator are.
Let me, since I'm a, older guy and I'm used to reading older biographies, and I'm basically a political historian. Let me ask a, more traditional kind of question. She's a celebrity, obviously. The cover, is kind of celebrity biography. People can look at it, there she is, that beautiful face, and, looking earnest and serious, and obviously taking up space on the cover, a lot of space in the cover. But again, she is a second-term congresswoman without any leadership role in Congress. And I wonder if someone asks you why devote so much space, so much time to working on a book, so many-sided treatment, including the Snapchat quotes, takeouts on the Squad, on the Green New Deal, history of the American left, her boyfriend life, to someone like this who, might, be forgotten in 2 years, or might decide to do, as you say, might decide to do something else outside of politics. So is there a danger of this being perceived as a celebrity biography as opposed to a biography about an important and rising political person in America who you argue has had a tremendous impact already on American politics?
I'll answer first and briefly, and then I'll throw to Rebecca, who can talk about the sort of the political, her political rise. But what I'll say is that, and this is sort of a personal story, but I was talking to a friend on the phone when I was reporting the book, and this friend is sort of a journalistic eminence, and I was describing to him this Instagram Live that she did in April of her first term. So she'd been in Congress for all of 3 or 4 months, and she was sitting on the floor of her empty apartment in DC, putting together IKEA furniture and drinking wine and eating gummy bears or like fruit snacks and popcorn. And she was all alone, and she just felt so, you really felt like you were in the room with her. It was the most transparent, raw, intimate. Politicians are always trying to look real. And this was the most real. She was so exposed as a person, just as a person. She was lonely. She had had a brutal 3 months in Congress. People were all over her. She was being strafed from every side. She was young. She was 9 years old. And I said to this friend, like, I've been watching these videos, they're so astonishing. And he said, she's a once in a generation talent. And I thought, right, like, that is the reason. You have never seen her before. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have seen her before, or that we won't see her again in the future before, but politics had never seen her before. And her rise from bartender to first-term woman was so astonishingly unexpected, fast, and she found her footing so quickly and made an impact so quickly. Meteoric doesn't even, it's like the word is the cliche word that people use to describe a rise and ascent like that, but it doesn't even begin to describe where she was and where she arrived at, even in 3 years. So I feel not the slightest bit of hesitancy or apology for having put her front and center and really made her take up space in the way that we did in this book.
Rebecca, you want to address that?
Yeah, well, my answer to this is going to be informed by the work that I do as a journalist, which is about women in politics. And so, and in fact, that began in like 2006 when I was sort of forced against my will to start covering Hillary Clinton's what would be her 2008 campaign for the presidency. And my work since then really has been about women in American politics. And I am so aware of the narrowness of the space. I keep talking about space, and I feel like I don't mean to just be doing like branding for the book, but truly the very narrow representational space for women, and how recently women have come into positions of power in American politics, and then under such constrained circumstances. We still comparatively have so few women in positions of American politics, in positions of power, and the kinds of women, right? She's different in so many ways. Still, women in politics still tend to be white women, right? Married women, older women who have already raised families, right? It's relatively new. I think it was Kirsten Gillibrand who was like the first sitting congresswoman to have had a baby while in office, right? Can you imagine? And that was, I can't remember what year that would have been. All of these limitations on when, as a woman, you can now have your political career and sort of be accepted and not. And there's still, millions of more representational barriers to break before we even begin to approach sort of full representation or participation. But she represents so much change that she's single, she's young, she doesn't come through traditional political channels. She came out of organizing, out of what felt at that time, and it remains to be seen, an ascendant left within, in Democratic politics. I don't know how ascendant that left is right now, but that is the moment that produced her, and the movement. What she would want to talk about, sort of the organizing that produced her candidacy. Her presence surprised the entire Democratic infrastructure, right? Like the people who would become her colleagues were shocked by the fact that she beat this stalwart in Crowley. All those things, and we're not used to that, and that matters in terms of women's trajectories in politics. Our impulse to sort of rear back from them, to over-identify with them, to love them too much, to hate them too much, that is all enabled by how few of them there are and how they come to mean so much. And she certainly, again, like, she means too much to too many people. That's one of the things I write about in my intro. But I think that makes her, like Lisa, I have no apology or qualm about the fact that there's a book about her, and having participated in that. I think she's incredibly important to the expansion of our idea of what kind of women can be leaders and can accumulate political power, and the ways in which they can be disruptive and still have political power. So I think she's incredibly important.
Those are great answers. I could ask you to elaborate a little bit about, explain, how she got to be AOC. That is, what are the main, explanations, factors that you mentioned a lot of them, Lisa, in your narrative. You mentioned some, and of course the expansion formatic, in the format helps to explain some as well. But was it her, obviously, ethnicity, her mix of a working class background and then moving to a suburban town, the kind of college she went to, her political savvy, her internet mastery, her beauty, which you say a lot about, which, some people might say, well, you shouldn't mention that so much, but obviously you understand how important that is to her persona. How does that mix together in her life story? Not just her life story, but obviously the fact that she has become this quite unusual congresswoman, because she's known and becomes a target for every Republican at the same time. Can you, as biographers or doing a biographical treatment, sort of what explanation, if someone asks you, so how did this happen? How would you explain it?
What I would say first and foremost is that she's an astonishing communicator, and always has been from the time she was a little kid. There's a story in the book about how she was a science nerd in high school, and she competed in science competitions And she was really, really good at like doing the fine bore sort of granular work of science, of sort of bench science. But what she was great at, what she was excellent at, what she was astonishing at, was translating these like nitty gritty details into a story, into like an exciting, dramatic story about science. And there's a story about her, she won second prize in this gigantic international science competition, the kind of science competition that Nobel Prize winners win. But the better story is a story about her before she went to the international competition. She was giving a little demo at the local school cafeteria, and there was a superintendent, some local school board person at the competition, and he excused himself for a minute, and then he came back, and when he came back into the room, she was called Sandy at the time. Sandy Ocasio was like in the midst of telling this like thrilling story about her experiments on roundworms, and everybody was riveted. Nobody could look away from her. And this local school official turned to the guy sitting next to him and said, "Who is that?" Like, thought she was a ringer. She was a professor, that she was like from a pharmaceutical company, thought she was like much older and more experienced than she actually was. And I just think, we started the biographical section with that story because it speaks to her fluency, like her ability not just to communicate in one way, but her ability to communicate in the language that's required of her in that context. So she, speaks Spanish with her relatives in the Bronx, and she speaks English with her like preppy friends up in Westchester. And she speaks science when she has to win a science competition. And she, she morphs into Twitter and Snapchat and Twitch. And then like you see her in congressional testimony, and she is astonishing. She was astonishing right off the bat. There was a very like boring, like non-event congressional hearing that she was at in February of her first year in Congress. So she had been in Congress for 6 weeks, and it was the most watched like congressional hearing ever on C-SPAN. So like she's a rock star communicator. And I think like if I had to pick like one attribute of hers, it would be that. She knows what she's talking to. She knows what's required of her in that context, and she talks that way. She's a polyglot. She has, and so we can talk about all the other things, like the fact that she, knows how to code switch. She knows how to, be one thing in one world and another thing in another world, and she's comfortable with that, and she's been comfortable with that for her whole life. I think that's another reason for her like ease in this context. I think her beauty is not something that you can look away from or ignore or pretend doesn't exist. She is a beautiful woman. It has allowed her into spaces that a woman who didn't look like the way she looks would not have been permitted to enter. And I think that's really real. And she talks about it. And I don't think it's doing her any favors to not talk about it. So those are just, she's a quick learner. She's a quick study, that's for sure. That's just off the bat.
I can ask Rebecca to comment on that, just to tell folks out there, we're going to go on this discussion between the three of us for another 20 minutes or so. But if you have questions you want to ask of the authors, please put them in Q&A. So we'll have those ready for about 15 minutes at the end. So Rebecca, you want to comment on what made AOC AOC?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with Lisa that it's her communicative talent, and it also is that talent in the moment in which she got elected, right? A period of immense fear for a lot of Democrats, right? A period in which like people were looking for something hopeful, and she was if I may put on my columnist hat very briefly, I will say that one of my ongoing complaints with the Democratic Party in recent years has been the challenge it seems many have found in telling a compelling, resonant, moral story about what their fight is, right? And here was something that this young woman was able to do in as Lisa said, polyglot in all these different languages, through all these different technological media, right? And you know, the way that she won her initial race against Crowley was showing up and being active and bringing the community in and being grossly underestimated, right? And not having, had anybody, including Crowley, thought that he was at risk for losing, he actually probably would have put more energy into it and won. So the actual way she becomes AOC and initially wins, speaks to, I think, some of the issues I was talking about before, an underestimation of what kind of woman could possibly enter democratic politics and triumph over its, you know, the powerful people who've dominated it for decades, right? But then once she wins that initial primary and becomes a celebrity, as you said at the beginning, which is she is undeniably a celebrity. What she then does with that voice that she gets as soon as every camera's on her, including her own in her kitchen or her living room, as Lisa talks about, is tell a compelling and energetic story that gives people something to feel hope or commitment about. And a lot of that story is about the power of organizing and using her own trajectory to say, look, if I can do this, then we all have a part to play, right? Through organizing, through coalition building. And she talks so much about, you know, systems and stuff that is sort of politically nerdy, but she makes it like maybe like the roundworms, right? She makes it compelling and draws people in. And that is a tremendous political talent. The hard part, I will say, I think, is that story is so compelling at the moment that she's entering as the challenge to the system. And it gets harder and harder the longer she's in the system. And that is a big like bridge in her career that we will see if she winds up successfully spanning.
Yeah, well, I want to raise that question of her role in Congress, and maybe in the future a little bit too.
Lisa, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, her role.
I'm sorry. Yeah, my internet sometimes is going in and out. I'm sorry. And obviously, you know, with Bernie Sanders most likely not, you know, going to be a main factor much longer because of his age. You know, she really is, you know, for want of a better word, the leader of the left in the Democratic Party right now. You could argue, even at such a young age. So how has she negotiated that role in Congress? And, you know, how has she negotiated the role of being this not celebrity, this powerful woman, but also, you know, one of the leaders of an insurgent, or as just Rebecca said, maybe still insurgent force in the country, the American left. I mean, it's a heavy burden to carry in many ways for somebody who, as I said in the beginning, does not have a structural position of power itself. She can't you know, urge, you know, can't rip people to vote in a certain way. And she, of course, has to balance, you know, not wanting to undermine her party leadership, but also she has to continue to be there as a moral figure and a figure who is standing on the principles that people admire her for. So how has she negotiated that as a congresswoman?
I'll tell a quick story and then I'll throw to Rebecca again, because this is exactly her sweet spot. AOC was supported in her campaign run challenge against Crowley by a group of mostly men who were refugees from the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign. And their idea was to repeal and replace Congress. And their idea was to, you know, put working class people who were not beholden to corporations or lobbyists to run them, and they would do sort of the back end. It was almost like a tech idea. They were going to create all these candidates who had kind of a Bernie platform, but who looked very different and who were nationally disparate. And they would create the back end. They would do the campaigning and the marketing and the, fundraising, and they would repeal and replace Congress. That was the big idea at the beginning. And what ended up happening was that AOC was really the only candidate they ended up being able to back, because their fundraising didn't go as well as they thought it would. And there wasn't the same kind of surge of support for this big vision that they had initially dreamed. And so they had to cut their losses basically before January of 2018 and just back her. And this caused a lot of conflict among the other candidates that they were supposedly backing. But this is all a long wind up to say that when she won, it was so surprising. It was such an event. It was like a political event, a media event. She became an overnight celebrity. And these guys, these Bernie guys were like, oh my God, we're like riding a rocket here. This was a Hail Mary. We thought we were doing a Hail Mary. And what ended up happening was we're riding a rocket and we have to just like ride this rocket. And so she brought them into Congress with her, and as her chief of staff and her head of communications. And these were guys who wanted to repeal and replace Congress. Their stated mission was to challenge sitting Democratic Congresspeople with, challengers who were not establishment people. So imagine coming into Congress with these two, with this infrastructure that's basically combative. It's basically outsider combative. We don't believe in this institution. We think it needs to be replaced. So suddenly the people that you're sitting on committees with, having lunch with, trying to form relationships with, are afraid of you and think that you don't know what you're doing, believe that you're an upstart, and that you've hired the wrong people to run your organization. And I think that for the first year, there was a big conflagration, a big thing with Pelosi, who really didn't approve of these guys being inside the halls of Congress. She didn't like it at all. And AOC ended up letting those people go and hired a more professional staff. And I think that first year was really tricky for her. And she had to let go of a lot of the ideas and a lot of the structures and a lot of the vocabulary and a lot of the slogans, a lot of the ways she was talking about things. And at the same time, as Rebecca said, hold on to her moral clarity, her insistence on moving the Overton window, on making what was once radical become normal. Like those were the things that she was good at. Those were the things that that drove her, that actually sincerely drove her. And she needed to maintain those positions in a more conventional organization. And I think that hasn't been easy, but it makes her more palatable to her congressional colleagues.
Rebecca, you wanted to comment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that what Lisa's raising and the question you're asking, and I don't know the answer to, right? I just don't traffic in predictions. I don't know how she is going to find that balance between being the person whose brand was in part insurgency and the person who is gaining ever more seniority the longer she stays, right? And the longer she remains famous and powerful and loved and hated and all those things, right? My guess, like Lisa's, based on how she's behaved so far, is that she is going to try to work within the system, right? And the interesting thing is there are models for that in some of my heroes in the left who have been like one of the people who I admire very much, who is Barbara Lee from California, the congresswoman. And it's very interesting because Barbara Lee has often stood by herself alone in a house that was fundamentally more centrist, more conservative in the years that she's been in it, right? But she is also somebody who has spoken to me about understanding how to manipulate the power structures, right? She has often stood by herself as the only vote, right? And yet she also works with the people who are ideologically to her right. She always has. She believes in working the system. And I see AOC as inheriting some of that practicality, right? The ability to continue to stand for what you believe, but also understand that you are working at a workplace and that if you need to be able to work with your colleagues in order to get anything done. And one of the big differences for AOC is that she is not alone in the way that Barbara Lee was for a really long time. The Progressive Caucus is stronger than it has been, right? And so she has not just the members of the squad, including, you say she's the standard bearer after Bernie, and that is true in terms of like sheer fame and recognizability. But in fact, she is there with Ayanna Pressley. She is there with Pramila Jayapal. She is there with Jamal Bowman. She is there with Katie Porter, who comes from sort of a different school of left advocacy within that house, right? And so I think she actually, working within that group, means she's not just working against the people with whom there's a giant ideological chasm. She is building networks, and that group, Bowman and Cori Bush, who I think is still in the, like, she's the insurgent, like, I'm not going to work with this. Like, I think that's the role that Cori Bush has right now. And I'm very interested in watching her too. But I think AOC is working with a group in a way that we haven't necessarily seen in Democratic politics in a long time.
No, that's a good point. I mean, that's why I said she was the incoming, so to speak, leader of the left, at least the left. Sense. You don't want to predict, but one of the things about celebrities, of course, even political ones, is that the longer they're around, their image changes. It doesn't stay the same. They don't want to stay the same. And sometimes if they're the kind of celebrities we're used to in entertainment and so forth, they have PR people to make sure that they're, continue to do that. But for a politician, it's more difficult. Of course, we have a very bad example of a celebrity in politics, our former president, who has not changed. And of course, he has a large following, partly because he hasn't changed, for worse, and some people for better. So do you think, again, I'm asking you to, based on your knowledge of AOC, to think about what, she might be thinking about. Do you think she's going to, do you think she has a plan, so to speak, for how to, continue to keep this large following together at the same time as obviously she wants to be able to have a more powerful role in getting legislation passed? And the Green New Deal is far from becoming law. The Democrats lose Congress, lose the House in the fall, which most people predict they will. She'll be less powerful again from a political point of view. So do you think she is, in other words, if you were going to write this 5 years from now, what do you think, how is she going to grapple with so the evolution of both her role and the role of American politics, and her role as a leader of the American left? Again, I think it's, in some ways she has responsibilities now in a way she didn't have when she was first elected to Congress.
I'm going to let Rebecca take this one.
That's a fair question to ask. So.
I mean, Rebecca and I have talked about this a lot, actually. And really what you're asking is like, how does she grow up? And I think that's a really complicated question, not just for a politician as young as she is, but for a woman who wants to have a family, who, talks openly about wanting to have a family. This is not just like, what are her political ambitions question. It's like, how does she grow up from wunderkind into mature female politician? And I think, as Rebecca said, we haven't seen this a lot. And so it's completely uncharted territory. And, she talks about climate change and how it affects her vision of the kind of family she wants to have. She does this like completely wide open, honestly, like a regular person. She talks about, wanting to have adopted a bunch of kids and how she's changing her mind about certain things. Like, I've never seen a female politician be struggle so openly with the things that all of us who have jobs and families and ambitions and aspirations struggle with. And she's doing it in a way that just makes me, I can't predict how she's going to make these choices in the next 5 years, but you have to incorporate these questions, these personal questions, into whatever calculation she's going to do.
We have a lot of great questions. I'll ask Rebecca to comment, and then we have like 10 questions, many of them excellent questions. So I want to make sure we have time for get that feedback. But Rebecca, you want to put a finishing line on that?
Well, I was really serious when I said that I don't traffic in predictions, because I truly could say, and I say that as somebody who looks at this person who is fascinating, who I've written about as a journalist, whose career I've watched with great interest, and I could right now imagine 5 different equally plausible scenarios. And at various points, I think I've probably made sort of regular guesses, like ordinary person watching her give a speech, on Instagram after the insurrection and thinking, as I think I might have written this in the introduction, there was a period where I was like, she's going to leave politics. If I'm guessing, this is not me, right? Like, but my private prediction that I wouldn't necessarily say this is what's going to happen, but I was like, this woman might very well leave politics in the wake of the insurrection. At other points, I think I, like a lot of other people, are like, when's she going to run for the Senate seat? When's she going to run for Schumer's seat? Like, and the other thing I think we have to be realistic about with regard to AOC and a lot of these other figures, the Democratic Party is incredibly old right now. And
The leadership, yeah.
Yeah, leadership, and I think the question of what the responsibility is if you're a younger member of the party right now, and I think there might be a sense of responsibility moving forward, right? Like, who is going to lead us into the future? Because it's not like, okay, so if it's not going to be her, who is it going to be? And I think that, to my mind, that plays heavily in my, like, there is some burden on the shoulders of these younger politicians who are the target of so much hate and derision and canonization and all of that. And it's like, also, you guys might be next up. And because I don't know who else is going to be. And so I think that plays into it too. And I honestly don't know. Somewhere between she leaves politics and she's the president is like anything,
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. I just to quote one line from Rebecca's introduction. This is about her Instagram talk after the insurrection on January 6th. Rebecca writes, she offered the reassuring warmth of Oprah, the fire and brimstone of Jonathan Edwards, the inspiration of John F. Kennedy, the intimacy of an FDR fireside chat. It was exhausting and reassuring and scary and comforting and extremely weird. It was kind of wild, and actually there was no real full precedent in American history for what it was or how it should be received. So there's a lot, a lot in that, of course. It's a fascinating book. I urge everyone to buy it, and let's and give it to their friends or enemies. So let me go to the questions. We have about 15, a little less than 15 minutes. So let me go from the first to the last as much as we have time for it, and give as short answers as you can, because there's a lot of good questions. So. Francie Scanlon asks, how important to her initial success was the fact she was seemingly so grossly undervalued and underassessed?
It was a huge factor. I mean, Rebecca said this. Crowley wasn't even looking at her. He didn't even show up to a town hall meeting where he was invited because he didn't think she was a worthy opponent, like that he didn't think she was a meaningful opponent. And so, and he had so much more money than she did, and he had such a bigger operation than he had his seat for more than a decade, and like she was not even on his radar, basically. And so I think she and the Justice Democrats like saw an opening there that he didn't realize how vulnerable he was.
I also think it's not just Crowley who underestimated her. It is the American political media, right? The Times didn't cover her until after. I don't think I have to check that. But
they sent a freelance to her victory party because they sent the staffer to Crowley's victory party.
Right. So it wasn't just Crowley who didn't see her coming. The people who, again, I'm hyper aware of how much readership relies on political horse race journalists, including us, right? To tell not just what has happened, but to predict a future. It's one of the reasons I try not to do predictions. And those people didn't see this person. And so she might as well not have existed until she just, boom, won and arrived.
A couple of questions which are somewhat more skeptical, I think. Shelby White asks, can you speak about her anti-Semitism and lack of support for he says Iron Door. I think he means the iron, what's it called? The Israeli defense system. The one the US helps to finance. The question I think is about, and this is something, of course, that a lot of people in the squad face as well. Tlaib, of course, others. As a New Yorker, and obviously there's so many Jews in New York, has that been a problem for her as a politician and as a public, person as well? In the left, where of course there's a lot of Jews, most of them are not pro-Israel, but is she considered an anti-Semite? Does she have to deal with that charge, as inaccurate as it probably is?
The one story I can tell from the biography is that she was seeking the endorsement from DSA in the Bronx and in Queens, which is where her district is. Yeah. And the people in the Bronx were skeptical of her because they were skeptical of her on Israel. And they wanted her to declare a commitment to BDS in order to earn their endorsement. And she wouldn't. And so there was a big conversation within Bronx DSA about whether they could endorse her if she wouldn't express her support for BDS. And they sort of compromised where she said she would support people's support for BDS or some kind of half measure. And what she said was that she would always call herself a socialist and she would always run as a socialist, and she was committed to being a socialist. And they did endorse her. She knows who her constituents are. She knows she lives in New York City. She knows where the votes are. She is not stupid. And I would not attribute feelings about Israel to her that she doesn't have.
Rebecca, you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have anything particularly incisive to say beyond what Lisa did, and to note that this is, the American left is critical of Israel, and to my mind, for very good reason. And there's always going to be, for those who are supportive of Israel, a blurring of exceedingly legitimate criticism of Israel and support for Palestine and Palestinians with charges of anti-Semitism. And I don't see that in her, and I don't see it as having been a challenge for her. So no, I don't think I have anything.
Here's an interesting question, Robert Snyder, about her impact on politics in New York City. Robert says, New Yorkers elected Mayor Eric Adams, who was more moderate. impact bigger nationally than in her own city? Interesting political question, because obviously she's a New Yorker, but I think you address this in different ways in the book, but it's not a central concern of the book. I think it's fair to say, or maybe I'm wrong.
It's like, who does she represent is a really, really interesting question. And the book struggles with it or wrestles with it some. I mean, in the aftermath of her primary win, it became clear that actually the people who really voted for her in large numbers were Bernie people who tended to be white or at least sort of upwardly mobile, lefty. They called them like Queen's mommies and class traders, like people who are Bernie identified, and that the stalwart African American and Latino neighborhoods still went for Crowley. In fact, there were data that showed that a Latino last name did not correlate with a vote for Ocasio-Cortez. So I think that's probably changed because she's so popular and she's such a rock star and she has so much money and she can deliver, she can do all of the stuff that Crowley was doing for them back in the day. But I think initially there was some skepticism and they knew that Crowley was going to deliver for them, and they didn't know who this young person was, and they weren't sure that she had their backs. And I think that's real.
Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Adams observation is interesting. You know, New York is a really complicated political city, right? And it's got millions of people, and they don't always vote in the ways that you expect them to, right? And I would also say that the whole city is voting Eric Adams, and it's her district that is voting for her, and that makes a difference. And her, as Lisa says, with her now, as in fact, her national profile is probably going to help her with the constituents who would have voted for Crowley because they saw him as the big force, right? Now, the fact that she has such a big national profile means that she is now like, I don't want to say rock solid, anything can happen, right? But she represents a kind of solidity and the notion that her constituents are represented within the House by an important and powerful quantity, right? And so that's going to shape how people in her district feel about her. But that's very different from how the entire city votes in a mayoral election, right? But yes, I mean, I think in general, there are a lot of confused notions about New York City and its politics, including that it is lefter than it often is, right? There is a perception that New York, and in fact, Ocasio-Cortez's election sort of seemed to stand in for that briefly. Like, look, it's New York. She's, of course they're voting for AOC in New York. In fact, right? And that actually sort of gave New York a lefter sheen than it actually has.
I'm old enough to remember that there were mayors named Michael Bloomberg and Rudolph Giuliani who won rather easily.
Right. Like New York is very capable of voting for fascists, and there's not the same kind of the thing that's interesting, like, Cori Bush's win. It's like there are other people from the left, Katie Porter, right, in Orange County. Like, there are other places that have elected these ascendant left politicians, many of them young women, right, where those elections within those particular districts are real serious flips. Marie Newman in Illinois, I don't know, I don't know that she and Cori Bush both had to take 2 tries. Sometimes these elections, they don't necessarily represent the whole political character, or even necessarily how those same people are going to vote the next time around.
Have you seen, by the way, this is not a question from the audience, a question I've been thinking about as you were speaking. Have you seen evidence that she's been inspiring other young women, obviously on the left, to run for office? I mean, the squad is so well known. It hasn't not been as much discussion about it since the Democrats, took over the Senate and the presidency. But but I wonder whether she's had that generative impact on other people running for Congress or for Assembly, State Senate, whatever offices. Have you seen any evidence of that?
I want to speak to that a little bit, and that goes back to something I said at the beginning about how few models for what kinds of women could be in politics existed, right? And again, especially for young people who grew up hearing that Hillary Clinton's presidential prospects were inevitable, right? Which was a word used by the media over and over again, right? That this was what American politics looked like, was Hillary Clinton establishment figure, right? And that, like, I think it's so easy to forget that, like, not 2 decades earlier, she had been cast as like a radical left-wing insurgent within her husband's administration, right? And like a feminist firebrand. The speed with which public perceptions of women in politics change is really remarkable. And it is also remarkable how short the period has been in which we've had any models at all for powerful women politicians. And so does her presence and her notoriety have an impact on, probably we can't even see yet, on young women, whether or not they're like fangirls, or whether they simply say, hey, I see somebody who who looks like me, but also talks like me, or had a job like I probably have, and yet she can be in Congress. I think that kind of modeling, we can't even begin to measure what that's going to be like, because it's not necessarily just people who are acolytes who want to be just like AOC, which is, I think, a sort of feminized, degraded version of what it means for a politician to inspire somebody. It's literally being a public figure that gives somebody who wouldn't otherwise have any sense that they themselves might become a politician, a sense that it's a job they might be able to do. And I think that part, maybe in 20 or 30 years, whatever her next choices are, will become more discernible to us as we hear from another generation of politicians who may tell us, like, whether they liked her or not, like, I saw she was in Congress and I saw she was a leader, and it made me think, oh, maybe that's something I could do. I could run for office.
As the author of the narrative of her life, I want to give Lisa the last word on this. And thanks everybody for asking good questions. And it's a sign of, I think, how interesting this book is, that unusual for a lot of the Zoom chats I've been involved in the last couple of years. Most people who started with us an hour ago are still with us. So Lisa, final words about this question, about her impact on other young women who might be running for office, or anything else you'd like to sort of finish up with.
When Rebecca was talking, I was thinking about one of my jobs was to inhale, consume, eat, breathe, sleep, everything that AOC has, every event she's ever been at, every tweet, every Instagram live, everything. And so I really did consume a lot over the month that I was working on her on the book. And I was thinking, when Rebecca was talking about this moment, she was at South by Southwest and was like in a one-on-one interview basically in a stadium. And that same year, Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar were both running for president, and were also at South by Southwest. And AOC got, I don't know, 3 times, 4 times as many people in the audience as either of those two female politicians did. And at the end, the Q&A was sort of unremarkable. It was kind of pre-digested. It wasn't. At the end, these 2 Girl Scouts stood up from the audience, and they asked a question like this, like, how do you be a politician? And they were both Latina, and they were probably 13 or 14 years old. And AOC said, you have to be comfortable in your skin, and don't let anybody tell you you can't do it. And it was such a amazing moment, because it was in person, this thing that Rebecca's talking about, like these 2 young women who had never seen anything like AOC. And she was saying to them literally in English, like, be who you are. Don't let anybody make you feel uncomfortable about your hair or your body or anything about you and go do this. And it was just incredible. I mean, it was an incredible moment. Again, I keep going back to her authenticity, which I think is, especially at the beginning, was really the thing that captivated everybody, that captured our collective political and media and fangirl and, you know, social media imagination, was how real she felt. And I will say, back to like, how does she do this? That authenticity feels a little more brittle now, especially since the insurrection. She feels more contained, she feels more managed, she feels more tighter. And I think that's partially the result of the real terror of having lived through the insurrection, and also being, you know, a second-term congresswoman, and, you know, having a lot to do. And so, yeah, I think that authenticity has been a
Well,
great.
thank you again. It's Take Up Space, the Unprecedented AOC, and the book is in many ways unprecedented as well. So, thanks to Rebecca and to Lisa, to the Leon Levy Center. Special thanks to Shelby White for her generous support of this and all our other events. And good night, everybody. Enjoy the nice weather wherever you are. And bye-bye.